We are going to start with the review of section 5.4. I've called it part 2, but the first couple of problems will be a review of what we did last Monday night. So I'm looking at number 41, and I observe that there is a common factor of 2 that I need to factor out. So that's the first thing I'll do. Now that I've factored out the common factor, I'm going to multiply the 10 times the 3 to get the number to go at the top of my x, which will be 30. And I'm going to copy the 11 at the bottom of my x. So I'm looking for 2 numbers that I can multiply to get 30 and add to get 11, which would be 5 and 6. And that's what I'm going to use to replace the 11x. So I'm keeping the 2. I'm copying the 10x squared. I'm replacing 11x with this 5x plus 6x. And I'm copying the 3. Now I'm going to factor this part by grouping. So from these first 2, I can factor out a 5x, and I get 2x plus 1. I copy the 2x plus 1 and observe that to get 6x, I would have to multiply 2x by a positive 3. And I check to make sure that 3 times 1 is 3, and it is. Now my common factor is 2x plus 1. My other factor is 5x plus 3. And I need to bring down this 2 that I had as a common factor from the beginning. So that's my final answer for the factoring of that problem. Now we're going to move on down to number 49. I observe in this one that there is no common factor. So I will begin by multiplying 12 times negative 4 to get negative 48, and I'll copy the negative 7. Now, if it doesn't quickly come to your mind of numbers that you can multiply to get negative 48 and combine to get negative 7, then remember we talked about making the list of factors. 1 times 48, 2 times 24, 3 times 16, 4 times 12, 5 won't work, 6 times 8, 7 won't work, and 8 I already have in my list. So I'm looking for a combination of these that I can combine to get a negative 7. And you will observe there is not one. So if there is not a combination that can give me negative 7, then this problem is what we call prime, which means it cannot be factored. Okay? So sometimes that happens. Not often, but sometimes it does. All right, now we're going to move next to problem number 65. I'm sorry, that's wrong. We're going to move next to number 57. So again, I'm looking for a common factor, and numerically, I see that 3 will divide into all those coefficients. I also observe that there's an n in every term, and remember I used the smallest exponent, so that would be n squared. And then I ask, what do I multiply by 3n squared to get 15n to the 4th? What do I multiply by 3n squared to get negative 39n to the third? And what do I multiply by 3n squared to get 18n squared? All right, so now I make my x. I multiply the 5 and the 6 to get a positive 30. I copy the negative 13. And I'm looking for two numbers that I can multiply to get a positive 30 and combine to get a negative 13, which would be a negative 3 and a negative 10. So back over here, my 3n squared, that was my common factor, is going to tag along. I'm going to copy the 5n squared. I'm going to replace the 13n with these two, so minus 3n minus 10n, and I'm going to copy the 6. Now, from that part, I'm going to factor by grouping. So from the first two, all I can factor out is an n. That's all they have in common. So I'm going to copy my 5n minus 3 down here so that it matches this one. And then I'm going to ask, what do I multiply by 5n to get negative 10n, which would be a negative 2. And I make sure that negative 2 times negative 3 will give me a positive 6. So now my common factor is 5n minus 3, and my other factor is n minus 2. And I have to bring down this common factor of 3n squared that I had from the beginning, and that becomes my final answer. All right, now we're going to move on down to number 61. Numerically, there is not a common factor, but I see that there's a y squared in each term. So I will factor that out. And get that. Now I'll make my x, and I'll multiply the 15 and the negative 4, and I'll copy the negative 7. Again, if you need to, make a list of the factors. 1 times 60, 2 times 30, 3 times 10, 4 times 15, 5 times 12, 6 times 10, 7, 8, 9 don't work, and I already have 10 in my list. So I look through these to figure out one that can give me a negative 7. And I see this one. So for the 7 to be negative, the 12 would have to be negative, and the 5 positive. So back over here, I'm going to keep my y squared that was the common factor, copy the 15x squared, replace the 7x with those two, the 5 and the negative 12 that I had from right here. So plus 5x minus 12x minus 4. So from the first two, I can factor out a 5x, leaves me a 3x plus 1. I'll copy the 3x plus 1 down here, and then ask, what can I multiply by 3x to get negative 12x, which would be a negative 4. And I make sure that negative 4 times a positive 1 gives me a negative 4, and it does. Now I see that my common factor is 3x plus 1. My other factor would be 5x minus 4. And I'm copying the y squared that was my common factor from the beginning. So this is my final answer for that problem. All right, next we're going to move down to number 63. And what I want you to observe that's different about this one is it has two variables and there's no common factor. But the last term still has a variable in it. So what we're going to do is just ignore that variable for the moment. We're going to multiply the 5 and the negative 6 to get negative 30. We're going to copy the negative 7. So factors of negative 30 that can give me a negative 7 are a negative 10 and a positive 3. So for 7AB, I just put an AB with both of those numbers for my x. So I put minus 10AB plus 3AB minus 6B squared. So that's the only difference, is that when there's two terms, two variables, both of them go with it. So you just separate it as ABs. Now, what's common to this two is a 5A, and I get minus A minus 2B. So I'm going to copy A minus 2B down here and ask, what do I have to multiply by A to get 3AB? And the answer is a positive 3A. So then is a positive 3B. That's a B right there, a B, because I already had the A. So now I make sure that 3B times a negative 2B gives me a negative 6B squared, and it does. So my common factor of these two is A minus 2B, and my other factor is 5A plus 3B. And that's my final answer for that problem. All right, we're on number 65 now, and it's the same concept that I have two variables. So I'm making my x, and I'm multiplying the 12 times the negative 5 to get negative 60, and I'm copying the positive 11 right here. Okay? Now remember, I made a list of the factors of 60 on another problem. So if I'm going to look back at that group, the group from this that can give me 11 is the 4 and the 15. So I'm going to put 4 and 15. And to get a positive 11, I would need the 15 to be positive and the 4 to be negative. So back over here, I'm copying the 12s squared. I'm replacing the 11st with these two. So minus 4st plus 15st. And then I'm copying the minus 5t squared. So from the first two, I can factor out a 4s, and I get 3s minus t. I'm going to copy 3s minus t down here and ask, what do I multiply by 3s to get 15st? So that would be a 5t, and then I check to be sure that 5t times a negative t is a negative 5t squared, and it is. So now my common factor is 3s minus t, and my other factor is 4s plus 5t. And that's my final answer for that problem. All right, the last one in this group is number 679. And you'll notice numerically there is no common factor because you've got a 6, a 7, and a 2. But I noticed that there's an M and an N in every term. So I look at the m, and my choices are 6, 5, and 4. I choose the smallest one. And for n, my choices are 1, 2, and 3. I choose the smallest one, which is 1. So to go from 4m to the 4th n to 6m to the 6th n, I would need a 6m squared. To go from this to a 7m5n2, I would need a 7mn. And to go from this to this, I would need a 2n squared. Now I multiply the 6 and the 2 to get a positive 12. I copy the 7 at the bottom. Factors of 12 that can give me 7 are 3 and 4. So I copy the 6m squared. I replace 7 with 3mn plus 4mn. And I copy the 2n squared. From the first two, I can factor out a 3m, and I get 2m plus n. I copy 2m plus n down here and ask, what do I multiply by 2m to get 4mn? And that would be a 2n. I check to make sure that this 2n times this n gives me 2n squared, and it does. My common factor now is 2m plus n, and my other factor is 3m plus 2n. And this common factor that I had way back up here has to tag along as part of my answer. So that's the final answer for that problem.